Hi, I'm Tony, and today we're going to talk backing. Backing is one of the questions that I get asked a lot lately. I've made my quilt top, I've got my batting. Now, how much backing do I need to buy? And then how do I put that backing together? So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to learn all about backing, what do you buy, and how to put that together. I just said that, didn't I? All right, let's get started. The quilt that I'm going to be using as an example today for backing is, of course, my Bargello quilt. This is the one that I made as the sample for my how to make a Bargello video. I've never actually quilted it, so we're going to use this one as an example. This one is 42 inches by 60 inches. Great, you think that's wonderful. A standard fabric is 42 inches wide. So you got to hold up for a second because a standard fabric is 42 inches wide. However, that also includes selvages. So what I normally do whenever I take a look at how much fabric to buy, if I'm looking at regular fabric, I deduct that to 40 inches. I assume every regular fabric, if it's not a wide back, and we'll get to that later, is 40 inches wide. A standard cut for 1 yard of fabric is 36 inches. Now, I am, just as a caveat, I am going to be using the imperial system today, so I'll be using inches and yards. If you use the metric system, please make sure that you convert it into the metric system of whatever it is. So 1 yard of fabric, 36 inches by 40 inches. So, 36, let's round that down because the cut could be a little bit weird. Let's go 35. So 35 inches by 40 inches. Well, that's not, 1 yard's not enough for that quilt at all. So now let's do some math. All right, so the area that we're working with for a single yard of fabric is 40 inches by 35 inches. So what we're going to do is measure your quilt top. No matter how big that is, you measure your quilt top, measure the width, measure the length. And then try to figure out, well, which one is the closest to the width and the length? Well, this one is 60 inches. Well, if I take 35 times 2, that's 70. That's the closest. So I'm going to say my 60 is going to be on this side. Well, then that means my 42 is going to be on this side. So remember, this is the length of, so the width of the fabric for how many yards you have is about the 35 inches. So I'm going to need 2 yards of fabric, but I'm going to have a whole bunch of extra fabric. Now, the other way if I want to look at it that way, if I do it this way, 42 times 60. So remember, we want to look at it both ways. If I want to put my 42 here, so if I get, let's say 2 yards of fabric, that would be 40 times 2 is 80. Well, that's okay there. And 2 yards of fabric would be 75 inches. Well, I don't need the full 2 yards then. The measurements and the conversions of how many yards equals how many inches is down below in a chart. 8 inches is a quarter yard. 16 inches is a half yard. 3/4 inches is 27 inches. 3/4 is 27 inches. Remember, we want to add some extra inches just in case. So in this case, if I have 35 plus 9, so 35 plus 9, that would be 44 inches. Oh, that's really close to my 42. However, we want to make sure we add some extra inches in there. We want to have some extra fabric around to make sure that we can quilt this. So let's go 1.5 yards. 1.5 yards would be 18. I know, I can't do math in my head. I'm a visual person. 8 plus 5 is 13. So that would be a 3. No. Yes, 53. Yes. So 53 inches. So that would be 80 inches by 53 inches. And that's only 1.5 yards. So this one was 2 yards. This one is 1.5 yards. So depending upon which way you're doing it, that's what you're going to do. Now, of course, the measurement of the 40 by 35 is down below so that you can keep that in mind. It's a little frustrating, especially if you're not very good at math. The biggest thing you want to do, and the formula is down below, is what you want to do is take your width and your length and then use multipliers. So if you do 2 yards, if you do 3 yards, if you do 4 yards. And keep going for how many yards. Just multiply it by how many yards. And then look up and see which way does it fit in. Do you want to go width by length or length by width? Remember, this is your yardage and this is your width. So whenever you buy a yard of fabric, it is going to be 35 inches for a yard by 40 inches. If you buy 2 yards of fabric, it's going to be wider. It's going to be the 75 inches by 40 inches. But if you take that and put it on top and sew it together, you can. So now let's take the example of my quilt. Now remember, this one is 42 inches by 60 inches. We talked about the width, figuring out your width, but you also have to figure out the width and the length. I know the math is a little crazy, but hopefully this will help you figure that out. So with this case, I figured out if mine is 42 by 60, it's better if I get a 1.5 yards to get my 42 inches to 35. Okay, so in this case, remember, I figured out, oh, well, I would have to go 2 yards this way and 1.25 yards this way. Great. Well, that handles the 42. Now I have to handle the 60 because that's how wide it is. But remember, if I get 1.5 yards, I've done the 42, but it's still only 40 inches at the width. So I have to double this. So figure out your width. So if you're sewing it together horizontally in strips, or if you're sewing it together vertically. And that's what you're figuring out back and forth. So in this case, because I want to only do by 1.5 yards for, yard and a half for that way, that figures out my horizontal. So I have to double that to make sure that 60 gets taken care of. So I'm going to sew 2 strips of 1.5 yards on top of each other, and that will get me enough fabric for my backing. Now, and this is why wide backing exists. It is just trying to figure out the math behind doing the backing. You could always just get some wide backing. They actually have 60-inch wide backing or 108-inch wide backing. Now, you may not get the exact fabric you like for your backing, but yeah, and there's also people that piece their backing. So like, you know what, I've got a yard, let me just add on a bunch of fabric to make sure it gets the size that I want to get. You can do that too. So if you don't want to do all of the math to try to figure out the width and the length and the sewing it together and doing all that, which I hate doing, which is why most of my lap quilt patterns are maximum 40 inches wide. That way you can just use a regular yard of fabric. Get yourself some wide backed fabric, 60 inches or 108 inches. Ask your local quilt store. They can take you to the wide back area and they'd be more than happy to help you. And that's backing. I know it's confusing. I know that it's lots of math and some people just aren't math people. But again, that's why we have wide backing. So hopefully you learned something from this video. Don't forget to like the video, follow my YouTube as well as Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, TikTok, my Quite Nerdy Quilters Facebook group, and I also stream live here on YouTube and Twitch. So if you ever want to see my schedule, just take a look at my social media and I always have it up.